Ask Mixing with Mike, what is the best approach to start applying compression in a mix? So in applying compression in a mix, when you start applying compression in a mix, and I'm really talking about this mostly from more of a novice perspective. Like if you're not an experienced mix engineer and you don't really completely understand mix settings, then the fundamental way or the best way to kind of very quickly go through and get a compressor sound or work with compressors without actually getting into the physical sound itself is to call up a basic plugin, a compression plugin. And I happen to really like the Renaissance compressor because it offers some very simple options in a very simple interface and also has an expander built into it, right? So this is kind of a cool plugin for starting off with. The first thing is to set a ratio. I usually start with a mild ratio to start with, and then I can change it accordingly, and the threshold. The threshold is really key because when you set the threshold, you're really determining when the compression is going to occur. How often do you want it to occur? So if you want it really occurring all the time, you bring your threshold down, and generally when that's the case, you bring your ratio really, really, really light so that you're not overly compressing. And then what that will do is it'll get the compression moving pretty aggressively. Now, or very actively. But otherwise, if you're compressing most instruments, you have the threshold fairly high so that the transient peak is triggering the compression, because that's usually the key for what you're starting to work with. And then you're making two basic decisions. One is how aggressively do you want to attack that transient peak? So if it's sticking out, if it's too pokey and standing out too much, then you want to go to a fast attack. If the sound is not aggressive enough, you slow down the attack, right? So the attack and the release are the real keys to getting the sound. The threshold just determines when you have it. The ratio determines how much, and we can adjust this afterwards. So if you adjust the setting here up about, anywhere from 10 to 20 milliseconds or so, then you're allowing that transient to kind of pop through more naturally. The release time, the easiest way to get the release time going is to start by calculating quarter note, eighth note, 16th note, 32nd note delay times, and starting with those basic settings and going through them. So if 240 is a basic eighth note time, then if you wanted to go faster on the release time, go to 120 or somewhere in that area. Go to 60, go to 30 if you want a much faster release, and see which one feels right. And if the instrument is more sustaining, then you probably will be going with a longer release time, like instruments that have notes that stand out. Percussive instruments, you're more likely going to faster release times. But this can vary. It can change very dramatically based on the instrument. Ultimately, when you go to those target numbers, if none of them work, then move the release time around until it actually feels right. What I like about this compressor is the optical electro characteristic changes the shape of the release characteristic. So the optical will make the release characteristic go off faster initially and slower towards the end, which will give it a more open sound. Whereas if you want to warm up a sound or fatten up a sound, switching to the electronic will slow down the initial release characteristic and it will speed up at the very end. So it's a way of adding less sustain, more sustain with the compression and the way the compression moves. And then you can add a tube characteristic or just a smooth, open, transparent characteristic to the sound. This is a quick way of doing it, and then you match your makeup gain for the amount of gain reduction that you have. These are the basic ways that you would go through sounds and really listen in context what you want to do to the sound. And that's really the key to making any compressor work well, is first of all deciding what it is that you want to do. What is missing from the sound? What characteristic are you trying to bring out of the sound? And if you start from a goal with a goal, an idea in your head of what you want it to sound like, what you want the compressor to do, you can either make it happen or not. And if you don't, then turn it off. Maybe the compressor is the wrong idea or it's the wrong type of compressor. But it at least gives you a starting place. The other thing to do is once you've got and applied your compression and you like the way it sounds, listen to it in the perspective of the other instruments and adjust the gain accordingly. Compression will generally make things sound more aggressive and louder, and therefore, or more distant if you have a really fast attack and long release, in which case you're going to need to adjust your gain to make up for what that difference and what that does in the perspective of the rest of the mix. The key about having the musical release timing is that if you get all the compressors kind of moving in musical timing, then you create more of this sensation of groove or movement and unity between all the instruments, which is a large part of what you're trying to accomplish. So that's the basic tip for the best approach for starting to apply compression in a mix. That's our Mixing with Mike, Ask Mixing with Mike mixing tip for today.